Hi everyone, Elizabeth here. It's been a little while, and I've just fallen so far behind on all of my booktube stuff. And so today I thought I would do something kind of fun. I thought I would combine two of the tags that I've been tagged in the last month or so, and try to combine them into one big tag that I could do today by creatively using ChatGPT to remix the questions so that they'll be a mix of the tags. So it's the tag of tags. You know how people have their bag of bags, usually under the sink, that's a bag full of bags. I thought this could be the tag of tags. So I thought I would combine the reading shifts tag, which I was tagged by the lovely Hannah at Hannah's Books, and the reading in the dark tag, which I was tagged by Joshua Kribo. And so I thought I would see what, as an experiment, to see what ChatGPT would come up with for me to answer. And so that's actually why I'm sitting in the dark right now. Apparently, one of the bonuses for doing the reading in the dark tag is to record in a darkened room. This is about as dark as I think my camera can pick up upon. I tried to go into an even darker room, but I just got lost in pixelation there. So this is my darkest as I dare go. So these are the questions that ChatGPT came up with to combine these two tags so that I could do both of them at the same time. Question number one, the origin story question. When you think back on your reading life, what feels like your supervillain origin moment? The childhood under the covers flashlight nights that shaped who you are as a reader today? And how has your reading power evolved since then? I think I talked a little bit about this in a very early video in the new booktuber tag video, but one thing I really liked about reading when I was young was that it was very independent for me. It was kind of a secretive, adventurous thing I did by myself. And I think that gave me an important feeling of independence that I really value and I still value today in reading. And that I think is really different from other sorts of media. You know, movies have ratings on them. People are generally, parents are very careful about what sorts of things, what sorts of TV and movies you can watch. And TV and movies are they're very broad based. They have to appeal to a lot of people. Whereas with reading, it's sort of a very private act. You don't know what's going to be in it, and you're sort of always you're sort of free to roam intellectually. And I think I really liked that as a little kid. And I think sometimes we romanticize childhood so much that we can kind of forget how restrictive childhood can feel, right? You're always being tested, you're going to school, everyone's always you're following a lot of rules that you don't necessarily know the logic of. And I think reading was just this little island of independence for me that I really liked. And I think for a kid, that can be a really important little corner of your life, your own choice, your own little world that you can pick out for yourself. And I think that has always informed, since I was a child, how I read. Whether it's, like I said in that original tag, whether it's crawling out onto the roof outside of my window, my bedroom window to read, or it's sneaking in to read those Victoria magazines I found on my own or whatever. The point was that it was my own adventure. And I always really liked that. And I liked the freedom that I feel in choosing what I read, and not only just what I read, but how I respond to it. That you're not performing, it's not a performative act, right? It's just sort of you and the text, and you can react honestly and authentically to the kinds of stuff you read. And so I've always felt that that's sort of my supervillain origin. I don't know if that counts. So for question number two, that ChatGPT came up with, combining these, do the seasons cast spells on your reading choices? And do you ever find yourself awake at 2 a.m. enchanted by an e-reader glow like some kind of bookish moth? Wow, these are really colorful questions that ChatGPT came up with. I don't think e-readers glow. Isn't that the point, that they don't glow? Or do they have backlights? I don't remember. Well, this is kind of two questions, right? It's about, do seasons affect how you read, and do you read at night, and do you read with e-readers? Actually, three questions. So I would say that seasons generally don't really affect my reading. And in general, like life outside doesn't super affect my reading all that often. Maybe if I get sort of interested in a particular topic in nonfiction, I might look up something and end up reading a book. But if it's hot or cold or anything like that, I don't think that really affects my reading. I think I read significantly less in the summer because I'm out and about and hiking and going outside and trying to enjoy nature in its greatest bloom. And I think I do tend to read more in the winter when we're sort of more hunkered down inside. I've never really totally gotten the beach read thing. I find it really hard to read at the beach or anywhere outside, actually. I prefer to read at home, and when I'm out, I'm out, and when I'm, and I'm just doing, I'm participating when I'm out, and when I'm in, then that's when more so when I read. I don't tend to read at night. I think that would keep me up. It would wake me up too much, so I try not to read at night. I did have an e-reader for a time. I had a Books, Boox reader, and it was all right. It was very easy on the eyes, but generally I have a hard time with e-readers because I find the screens too small and you keep having to flip to new screens all the time. So I know this is crazy to some people, but I actually really like to read on my iPad a lot of the time. And it's really not that bad. I choose a setting, so if I turn it all the way down here, I have it with me. You can see how it's not really that bad to read. Right now it's showing a lot of glare because I'm facing a light, but you can turn it all the way down and it feels very much like an e-reader. I wouldn't say that I feel any kind of eye strain from that, but I know to some people that's crazy talk, but but that's how I read. I wrote here one note. There was one time when what I was sort of doing in life really affected how I read, and it was a very cool experience, which was some years ago when I was traveling in France. I happened to end up in the region around where Rousseau stayed with his lover. And it was very cool because I was reading his Confessions, the autobiography. I was reading portions of it. And right when I kind of came across the description, we happened to be very close to that very house. And so I drove out to the house I was amazed that it was still around. And the description was extremely accurate. It was actually kind of amazing. I could actually recognize parts of the house that Rousseau had talked about because it was so utterly accurate, the way the stairs were shaped, the way that the house was just sort of constructed. The gardens were really accurate. It's true they may have, I think, tended to the garden to Rousseau's description, but the way that the garden was situated was really, really accurate. I thought that was sort of amazing, a kind of fact-checking on Rousseau's autobiography, so that was very cool. But generally, my reading life and my outside life are a bit different, are a bit separate, unless I'm looking something up or something. So the next question is, have real life plot twists ever sent you scrambling for very specific books? Like, my garden is dying, my kids won't sleep, or I suddenly need to know everything about medieval beekeeping. What book became your guide out of the darkness? Again, very original on ChatGPT's part. I'm very impressed. Medieval beekeeping, that sounds interesting. Most recently, I would say right after I've gone on and on about how my outside experiences don't really affect my reading. But one thing that I have been really interested in recently is this book, Reading the Forested Landscape. I came upon this because I started doing nature walks with actually a club, and it was amazing to me the depth of knowledge that the people I was hiking with had about the plants, even just the tiniest plants that I probably wouldn't even have noticed. How much knowledge they had about the landscape, and it sort of amazed me, and how much history, sort of folk history, that I wasn't aware of, was embedded in those plants. An example was someone sort of, I was walking along and we were sort of in this meadow or field that had a border of forest. And I was sort of looking up at the trees, trying to identify the trees or looking out across at the field. And someone called me over and said, "Oh, look over here, look over here." And they squatted down and there were these absolutely tiny, tiny plants. I mean, maybe shorter than this. And if you looked very closely, they had these little sort of red berries or red caps on them. And they said, "Oh, these are British soldiers." And I said, "Why are they?" And they said, "Well, they're the red coats. So here are the British soldiers across the field here." And it's so New England somehow. Where I grew up, there's no way that if these plants were there, there's no way those plants would be called British soldiers. But because I'm in this particular region, I thought it was sort of funny that it had this historical inflection to how these things were named. And that's just one example. I mean, everywhere we went, people would say, "Oh, come here, have a sniff of this leaf." And they'd sort of crumble it in their hands and it would smell like spearmint. There were all sorts of edible things all around me. And I just thought, I have been missing out. I've been completely missing out. I need to know more. And so I found this book. And this book is really, really interesting. It happens to be a nature guide for exactly where I am, central New England. But what's very cool about it is the way that it educates one about the natural landscape. So it's filled with these illustrations. And let me see if I can find one. So at the beginning of each chapter, there is an illustration, like something like this. And the idea is that in the illustration, an illustration just like this, there are a number of clues about what the history of that landscape is. And so he starts you off with the illustration and with a chapter heading that actually isn't very descriptive. You're meant to look at the image and try to take some guesses about what the history of this landscape might be. Well, we can see that there's a very prominent sort of gash in the bottom of this trunk. This tree is here, this is fallen, and so on. And then basically the chapter covers what you're looking at, simply, so that you can better identify the history of the forests that you're looking at. Things like where a fire may have happened. So I'm looking at one of my notes here. So a fire will burn longer on the side of a tree that's on the downslope. So there's a tree here. If there's a slope here, it'll burn longer on this side. So basal scars will appear on that side. So you can tell like where a fire burned through a forest. It's really sort of amazingly detailed. And I just learned a ton about the history of the region where I am. I don't know how interesting this is to anyone else, but I was just amazed. In the region that I'm in, basically we have a lot of very, very young forests, despite the fact that I'm in one of the oldest and longest European settled areas of the whole country. And through each very young forest, you'll just see tons and tons of mysterious sort of stone walls. Why is there a stone wall in the middle of the forest? I had some notion that these used to be farms, so I had some notion that before the sort of much better soil was discovered out west, when farms had to grow crops in New England, which has a terrible rocky soil, all of the land was cleared. I did know that the rocky soil, it sort of churns up rocks, so there's nothing you can do. You can't sort of take out all the rocks. And I did know that when they would take out the rocks, they would sort of build them into these little walls. What I didn't know was how different it was before colonists came. I did not know the history of Native American sort of husbandry, I guess you could call it, of the forests. I didn't know that before Europeans came, Native Americans had almost 10,000 years of their own shaping of the landscape. I guess I did have sort of this naive view that there was this sort of untouched Eden that existed in this area before before Europeans came, this idea, this sort of romantic idea, maybe that there was this sort of virgin forest and the Native Americans lived in harmony with the forest or something. But no, it was very different. So Native Americans took a very active role in this region anyway in shaping the landscape. And so at that time, when Europeans arrived, it would have looked completely different here. There would have been huge old growth forests with an almost completely clear understory. They practiced burning very actively to keep the understory clear. And there were several reasons for this. One was because mosquitoes basically, mosquitoes and other biting flies and things reproduce underneath leaf litter, so they would burn all the leaf litter away, getting rid of small saplings and kind of making this almost sort of park-like landscape of just large trees and clear understory gave Native Americans a clear view for bow hunting so that they could see deer and things. And there are actually a zillion more reasons that I learned in this book why they tended to it this way. And it sort of amazed me. Like, I mean, it changed the landscape so much that the forest line apparently started sort of 6 miles in from the coast, which is absolutely not what it's like now. And different animals lived here because there was almost a kind of grasslands near Boston, which, if you know New England at all, that seems very, very, very different from today. And there were different animals. There was this kind of chicken, I don't remember what it was called, like a prairie goose or a prairie chicken or something. They have to just live in grasslands, and they lived here. And gosh, it really blew my mind. I've gone on about it too long, but this was really, I'm still sort of working through it very slowly. I've slowed down now because it's winter and I can't really walk through these landscapes right now. And I really want to take this book with me and sort of learn, sort of test my knowledge as I go. But this is one of the most sort of enlightening books I've read about my local region, my local sort of life in years and years. It's really quite incredible. And I think it's the kind of knowledge that's useful for anyone should you be interested in it. It really teaches you how to look at a landscape, almost like if you take an art history class and you learn how to look at a painting. You may then go on to different art traditions than the book actually covers, but it sort of tells you a way of seeing. That's kind of how I view this book, and it's really changed the way that I look at landscapes. And it's just really convenient for me that it happens to be my exact my exact region. So that's my answer to that one. I don't even remember what the question was anymore. The next question, oh, right, it was something about medieval beekeeping. And right. So the next question is, when life goes dim, whether it's a move that scatters your shelves, a season of caretaking that leaves little quiet, an illness that fogs your focus, or a storm that takes the lights with it, what kind of reader do you become? What books find you in those shadowy in-between hours? I think when things are difficult, I like to just throw myself completely into huge projects that I usually don't finish. So the legacy of the project will remain, but I almost will never finish, some really ambitious reading list that I might come up with or something. I think the most recent example is I got really into linguistics and just trying to learn everything I could about how languages work. I would not call myself any kind of expert, but it just fascinated me. And I think what I like about doing something like that is, it's a world of pure. It doesn't really what it is that you're learning about doesn't care what's happening to you at the moment. German waits for no one if you're learning German. Mathematics does not care if you've got the flu or what is happening to you. Math is math. And I think that sort of feeling that there's this world outside of yourself can really help take you outside of your own I don't want to say self-absorbed because when one is having trouble, it can be genuinely painful. And I feel like self-absorbed makes it sound sort of blamey. But what I mean is it sort of takes you out of yourself so that you can see sort of that there's still a larger world around you that's still chugging away no matter what's going on with you. And somehow I find that a great comfort. It sort of reminds me of a non-bookish story, but I remember once, long, long ago, it was the first time I sort of experienced this feeling that there's a comfort in the fact that the world keeps turning. I was having a really tough time, and I was sort of very upset about something, and I was having to go somewhere. I was in a car, and we stopped to go get gas, and I went inside a convenience store. And I saw one of my favorite ice creams. It's these strawberry shortcake popsicles. They're sort of these strawberry flavored ice cream popsicles that have little soft cookie crumbs around them. And they're just a little kid's treat. And I looked down at that treat and it was sort of pink and white and cute and silly. And it reminded me of eating these ice creams. And no matter what was happening to me, that ice cream was still there. It was just, it wasn't affected by the fact that my whole world had just imploded or whatever. The ice cream was still there. And I almost like a child, I bought the ice cream and I ate the ice cream and I felt better. But it wasn't because of eating ice cream. It was sort of this feeling that, this comfort that I took in the fact that, no matter what's happening to me, they're still selling these little strawberry shortcake ice creams at the gas station. There's just something so nice about that. And I think when I'm in trouble or extremis, sometimes I guess I might read something related to the problem. I guess sometimes I might opt for some kind of escapism. I think that's also another reaction that many of us have. But for me, it's sort of like I love throwing myself into something that won't go easy on me because of the situation I'm in, if that makes sense. Like, I like going for something where there's sort of like objective facts to the matter, and it doesn't matter if you're sort of crying and falling apart. It doesn't matter if you're angry. It's not going to sort of accommodate you, and it's difficult for me to describe, but somehow that's a great comfort to me. It doesn't care. You need to just, you either know this thing or you don't. When you read about it, it is what it is. It's not sort of making exceptions for you or taking into account or anything like that. Does that make sense? I don't really know. But somehow that brings me a huge amount of comfort that there are still good things in the world, no matter what's happening to you personally, I guess is maybe the best way that I can describe that. The next question is, when you hit a reading slump, are you more likely to A, gently coax yourself back with comfort reads, or B, leap dramatically into a book you know absolutely nothing about, like you're trusting fate to catch you? I think for me, generally, if I don't really feel like reading anything, then I just kind of don't read. It does happen sometimes, but it doesn't really shake my sense of self. I don't feel like it's an emergency, like I must immediately find something else to read or my whole identity will fall apart or anything. There are lots of things to enjoy in life, and sometimes we have different seasons of life in which we enjoy different things. To me, I very much view books as a medium and not a message. I think there are different kinds of, I think books have specific strengths that make me generally gravitate towards them. I think they're really set up very well for certain things that I like. Like I like exploring interiority. Well, it's a lot easier to explore interiority in a book than it is in a film, for instance. But I think one thing that's kind of, I don't know, maybe unexpected or something, is that I don't really define myself as being a reader, or by the fact that I read. Reading is a thing that I do, that I enjoy doing, but it's not sort of, I don't think it's the only worthwhile thing or something that I feel like panicked about if I'm in a reading slump. I never even really thought about reading slumps before recently hearing the term. So I think if I find that I'm in a reading slump, I neither coax myself back or jump into something new. I just sort of wait for myself to feel that I feel like reading. And so I don't really have I don't feel any sort of panic about that. So Um, the next one is, have you ever finished a book that left you wandering around in a daze, whether you were camping, stuck in a car, hiding in a basement during a storm, or lying in bed staring at the ceiling like the main character in a Victorian novel? Uh, the first question I have for ChatGPT is: do main characters in Victorian novels stare at ceilings? I'm not. I'm not even sure where it's getting that from. Uh, I think ChatGPT might be a little bit confused about what people are doing in Victorian novels, but yeah, definitely. I would say almost every book I read has some kind of a hangover. I think that's kind of what keeps me reading more slowly than I would otherwise. But I really, really need to digest after I finish a book. And I think it's because endings are so important to me. It's only after I finish a book that I can see the entire structure of the book, that I can understand the book in some way, that I can really see how the book was constructed, I guess. And so, in a way, it's almost like maybe I'm never satisfied, because my greatest enjoyment of a book is looking back on it once I've finished it sometimes in some ways. But then the book is over. And so I sort of feel sad, and I find that I missed the book now that I have this great new information about it. And so I would say that it kind of happens to me more often than it doesn't happen to me. And I think in the past I used to kind of balance that out by sort of alternating fiction with nonfiction. So while I was going through my hangover with a fiction book, I would sort of pick up something that was nonfiction. I think I still sort of do stuff like that, although with nonfiction, more and more I find myself watching lectures as a way of sort of getting into a subject, or I'll find myself sort of researching papers, I guess. And so I don't actually end up talking as much about the nonfiction that I'm reading, because I'm sort of not reading full books. I'm sort of doing little research projects, I guess, in a way. And then the last question, what books are your personal everlasting glow sticks? The ones that always brighten your mood, illuminate a new thought, or remind you why you love reading in the first place? I would say I'm a little bit biased because of what I've been reading recently, but I would definitely say that two authors that come to mind are Shakespeare and Iris Murdoch. So with Shakespeare, it's just, you can always find something new in Shakespeare. I actually just reread Hamlet recently, and I think after I finish these questions, I might quickly go over some of the stuff I've been reading. But it's amazing. I first read Hamlet in high school. I must have been 17 years old or so. And I've read it a number of times since then, and it still always strikes me differently every time. And I think that's sort of what's amazing about Shakespeare, and why I find so much worth reading in him. And I do like to reread Shakespeare. And the other thing is, it's a strange thing to admit, but I'm always like worried when I read authors that I like a lot. I'm always worried about running out of stuff from them. Like, it would be a very sad day for me when I realized that there was nothing new for me to read from a favorite author. So I strangely, maybe somewhat perversely, kind of shy away sometimes from reading too much of an author that I like a lot. And so Shakespeare is one of those authors. I've not read even close to all of Shakespeare, because I always want to have something in the wings that's new that I could read from Shakespeare. So I kind of like to reread Shakespeare. When I feel like experiencing Shakespeare, I often opt to reread what I've already read rather than read a new play. I know that's weird, but I can't. I get sad when I think about that. There's a limited number of pieces by favorite writers, and as long as there's something I haven't read from them, I can be surprised, and I can anytime pick up something new, and it's as if they're still living, I guess. And so I'm sort of shy to read all of Shakespeare, so I like to revisit. So I recently revisited Hamlet. And with Iris Murdoch, she's another writer actually where she wrote a zillion books. I think it's really unlikely that I would ever read them all anyway, but she's another writer where I often opt to reread rather than to read a new one from her. But she's a little bit different too, I think, because I think with her, she has such a particular style, and in her writing, she has such a particular way of looking at the world, and she has such particular types of characters, and even the way the plots work, the arc of the plots, the setup, the setups of the plots are very, very reminiscent. So even when you're reading a new Iris Murdoch, you kind of feel like you already know what you're reading in a positive way, I guess. If it's something that you already like, it's really nice because you sort of know what you're getting with Iris Murdoch already. So whether you're rereading one of her books or I dare to open a new book from her, I guess that's my equivalent of like a cozy read. Like I kind of know what I'm going to get. And sometimes that's really, really appealing to me. And sometimes it's like, I just need something new. I already know what's going to happen in this book, whether it's new or not, I know. But those I would say are sort of like the authors who are everlasting glow sticks. And then there are kind of, individual books that I think I can revisit over and over again. But those would be two authors that I really like. So that was my weird tag of all tags, ChatGPT designed thing. I just wanted to quickly talk about what I've been reading recently because I do intend to make videos for each of these books, but I don't know when I'm going to get to it just because the holidays are really busy and I'm having to travel quite a bit for work, which is not very common for me. So I just haven't had the chance to talk about what I've been reading. So I just wanted to give a little preview of what I've been reading at least, just to touch base with everyone. So I have been reading. I've read a little bit of Rilke. I read Letters to a Young Poet. And I was really impressed by this book because I've always associated Rilke with poetry. And I generally don't read poetry in translation. I'm sure there's a lot to get out of it, and I do like reading Old or Middle English even in translation, but when it comes to a completely different language, I tend to avoid poetry in translation. But Letters to a Young Poet is not poetry, it's letters. Apparently Rilke was one of the best letter writers of his time, one of the most voluminous anyway letter writers of his time, and I was very impressed by it. And I also was very I really liked the subtlety of his letters, because I think advice to younger people, advice to the young artist, it's sort of a genre in itself, can sometimes get a little syrupy. I think sometimes some thinkers like Rilke have been a little bit co-opted by like sort of the self-help world. And I was surprised and very pleasantly surprised that Rilke is not just sort of the always try your best, self-help kind of guru guy, but he has a lot of interesting observations on what it's like to be an artist that I thought was interesting. I also read Klara and the Sun by Katsuo Ishiguro. I actually came to that from another YouTuber, Upgrade Your Books. And I dropped everything and I read it because I just thought that the Folio Society edition of the book looked so beautiful. I just had to stop everything and read this book. The illustrations, which I might be able to find and put up here somewhere, reminded me so much of Wyeth's Christina's World. And that just sort of drew me in. And I was not disappointed. I do feel that Ishiguro was probably influenced by this type of this sort of spare American style of painting. And indeed, when I talked to the YouTuber Upgrade Your Books about it, he said that indeed Ishiguro was influenced. I don't know if he was thinking of Wyeth specifically, but he was thinking of about certain American painting traditions when he wrote the book, and that was really there. And it was a very emotional book for me, but I can go over that another time. Did I say I read Hamlet? Yes, I reread Hamlet. I think that may have been my fourth or fifth time rereading Hamlet. Always so much of interest in that. This time I was very taken by a couple of things. One was, of course, we're always wondering, why does Hamlet delay? And this time I couldn't help but see it as somehow there's an avoidance of his own end. So I was interested in the fact that I never really took note of the fact that even before Hamlet, learns that anything is rotten in Denmark, in the very first scene, he's already sort of thinking about suicide. So he's already delaying before he's charged with any kind of great duty. He's already thinking about acting, not acting. There's already a hesitancy in him. And I found that quite interesting. And all I could think about, well, a couple of things. One is I couldn't stop seeing a complete and utter parallel between the Orestia, the story of Orestes, and Hamlet. And I thought, well, people always say that Shakespeare didn't read the Greeks and so on, but it just kept striking me over and over again. And I know that literary criticism kind of gets a bad rap, but I actually really like literary criticism because it's kind of like having someone who's really well read and very interested in exactly what you're reading have a chat with you right when you're interested in that particular thing that you're reading. So I looked up some secondary literature on Hamlet and the Orestia, and of course I feel ignorant, but apparently this is a very common insight, and so I read a bit about that, and there were a lot of interesting connections between Shakespeare and the ancients that I didn't know about. So I'd probably talk more about that in the video I make on Hamlet. And there's this other thing that's sort of hard for me to articulate. Maybe I'd have to find some quotes to sort of substantiate it. But what I was saying before about how there's already a hesitancy there, it seems almost as if he finds his fate to be tied to Claudius's, as if he has some foreknowledge that once he sort of acts, once he crosses the Rubicon, in a sense, he too will die. That Claudius's life and his life are sort of tied. I would substantiate that more in an upcoming video, but. And also another thing that struck me about Hamlet when I read it this time was how much of it was about remembrance, how much Hamlet is not bothered by the fact that his father was murdered to some extent, but how quickly people forget. So, other times I've read this novel, it just sort of seems like that's what he's bothered about in the beginning when he's kind of sulking. But if you really pay attention to Hamlet throughout the play, that seems to be one of his main gripes. And that's sort of why he takes out his grief on his mother and on Ophelia and so on, because it's about legacy, and that's why his death also, there's this whole thing of what does he say, put aside joy for a while or something like that. So it was interesting to me because it's more about reputation in some ways than about the fact of his father's death. And I also thought about, I'm sorry, this is just rambling, but I also thought it was interesting that Ophelia gets a beautiful death and nobody else does. And I had some theories about that, about why does Ophelia get sort of a painless or seemingly somewhat beautiful death, whereas everyone else gets these horrible, wretched deaths. And I think it has something to do with Ophelia's authentic feeling compared to sort of the artificial machinations of the other characters. But I don't know how interesting this is without my sort of pulling out examples. It just sort of sounds like I'm saying stuff. So those are some of the things I read. I've also read, I read my first short story by Henry James. So I also feel terribly ignorant, but I only knew Henry James for sort of The Innocents Abroad, and what were some of his other books? Can't think of them right now. There's another one called like Mrs. Something. I'm just thinking of Mrs. Dalloway right now, but another book, and they tend to, it seemed to me that most of his writing was about sort of innocence versus cynicism in the guise of sort of naive New World people, Americans going over to the Old World, to Europe, and being sort of taken advantage of or something, which is not really a duality that interests me, I suppose, and also doesn't really seem very relevant to our current world. But I did learn more about Henry James and how his style sort of evolved away from realism over time. And later in his career, his later work seems much more interesting to me. So I read a short story, The Beast in the Jungle, and I loved this short story, or I guess it could be sort of a novella. And it's about, it's one of those modernist things where there's not a lot of plot, but it's sort of about this young man, and he befriends this young woman, and he says, I have a secret to tell you. I have to tell you that I've always had this foreknowledge that something really big is going to happen in my life. So then these two become sort of best friends, and they spend their lives awaiting this big thing that's going to happen in his life to him, the beast in the jungle. But of course, that's not really what it's about, right? And so I loved this short story, but do you ever read something where even as you're reading it and as you're enjoying it, you can hear the voice in your head of someone who hates it? Like, I can totally see why someone would not like this. It has a lot of indirect speech where people just sort of, they keep mumbling about things and you don't know what they're talking about exactly because it's all sort of implied. So there's a lot of, but then he said, and I said, but did you think that? And, it's a lot of that kind of thing. And I totally understand why a lot of people wouldn't go for this, or they would find it sort of gimmicky or annoying, but I loved it. And sometimes, I don't know, it's almost, I guess that's what I would call almost sort of a guilty read. But I really like it. I totally see why other people wouldn't like it. I don't recommend it for everyone. But if you like modernism, you like, if you have a certain temperament or a certain aesthetic, I think you'll really like this. And it was very interesting to see this other face of Henry James, who I was never particularly interested in before. And the last thing I'll sort of go over is I was traveling, like I said, for work. I found myself, horror of horrors, without a book to read. So I had to sort of run into a bookstore, and it was kind of like an airport bookstore. It didn't really have a lot of books. And I picked up a very different book that I wouldn't usually have picked up, Slaughterhouse V. And I'd heard of Kurt Vonnegut, but I had no idea what it was about. And it was an interesting read. I have some reservations about it in the sense that it's a semi sort of autobiographical, semi-surrealist account of a man who goes who fights in the bombing, who witnesses, an American man who witnesses the bombing of Dresden, basically, who's in the American side of the war. And it's semi-autobiographical. Kurt Vonnegut actually was there during Dresden. But my overall feeling about it is it's a very, very interesting account of what people who found themselves in war had to do in order to survive psychologically, the way that they have to remove themselves. It's essentially a novel of PTSD, more or less, and it has all these fantastical elements in which he goes and visits aliens and all this stuff. It's very clearly all sort of a metaphor for his PTSD. But my reservation about it is, I think it's often called one of the few truly anti-war novels. It tries to make war seem absolutely awful. It does not glorify war, and I do very much believe that that is what Vonnegut was going for. But I also fear that in his trying so hard to show us the horrors of war, and also to illustrate to us the ways in which people had to deal with seeing those things, the way that they had to pull away emotionally just so that they could keep it together mentally, I think accidentally it does in some way glorify a sort of stoicism that I think might actually contribute to the popularity of this book. Vonnegut is talking about someone who simply can't engage in his life anymore, cannot engage emotionally in anything or anyone around him, and finds himself crying alone at times. This is absolutely tragic. But I think the way that it comes across a little bit is, I'm so cool I can walk away from explosions and I'm not even like, I don't even care. And there's very much I'm going to tell you I'm going to tell it like it is, and I don't even care, whatever, I saw this terrible stuff, and then when I see a horse being whipped, I break down in tears. Well, why is he doing that? Obviously because he has PTSD. But I think a little bit about young and I think a little bit about the types of people who would read this. A lot of the types of people who would read this would be very young boys in their early teens or young men. And I fear that unintentionally, utterly unintentionally on Vonnegut's part, there is a little bit of a coolness factor. And that I think is a very unfortunate artifact that we can very easily read into this book. I think for men who actually did serve in war, this would be an incredible catharsis, a cathartic book for them. And it certainly enlightened me about what it's like to serve in war, and what the sacrifices that people make in order to just simply be able to continue on with their lives after seeing some of the things that they saw. But I also feel that Vonnegut avoids a little bit directly dealing with the conflict. We never actually kind of directly see Dresden. I sometimes feel that Vonnegut was still experiencing, going through PTSD while he was writing this book. I'm not sure he was able to write the book it's very, I'm not saying it's bad or that it's, I'm just not sure he was able to write the book in as direct a way. He wasn't free when he was writing the book. So it's an interesting book. It's very informative, but I don't know that he was free to choose exactly how he wrote it. He had to write it this way. And so it's interesting, but I have these reservations about it. So that's what I've been reading recently. That was my tag of all tags. That was my video of all videos, very long. Thank you for sticking with me if you have. And I will try to post more frequently so the video isn't so long. If you're really interested in more details about my responses to any of these books, let me know so that I know that there's any interest in my going on longer about these books. And yeah, I guess I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.